Get in there. Hey everyone, John from Nintendo Life here, and most of the big important Wii U games are currently on the Switch already. But during the last Direct, something weird happened.
Who will join you in your adventure? Hint, anyone can. Band together on a quest to face evil and save faces.
So, Metopia is being remade for Switch by Grezzo. And what are the implications of this? This is a 3DS title making its way to Switch, and we don't often think about it that way around. We think about how many Wii U games can come along, but there's a whole library of other games that could come to Switch. So, that's what we're going to do today. We're not looking at the very best 3DS games, we're looking at the 3DS games that would be the best fit for Nintendo Switch. So without further ado, let's dive in with one of my favourite 3DS games and quite a late one. I wonder what it could be. Tell us, Future John! Oh boy, starting with a big and pretty obvious one, Metroid Samus Returns. This game came to 3DS while the Switch was around 6 months old and most of us just wanted it on the Switch. In fact, many of us convinced ourselves, of course it's coming. This is Mercury's Steam. They ported their Castlevania Mirror of Fate 3DS exclusive to consoles, so clearly they can do this. It's been 4 years. So Metroid Samus Returns is a brilliant reimagining of Metroid 2. Much like Zero Mission, it took the framework of the original game and then just did its own thing with it. Pretty much everything here is new, and it brings the Metroid series forward. This was the first 2D Metroid in 15 years, and with that gap, of course there were going to be refinements. The combat in Samus Returns is more visceral and hands-on than ever. You have these brand new Aeon abilities like Rapid Fire. Like, look at this stuff! You're a walking machine in this game! Now, I do think the premise of hunting Metroids does get repetitive, but with quality of life improvements there's a lot more they could do. For instance, more original Metroid bosses. This is also a really good looking 3DS game, with some really detailed backgrounds and some great models. With a few touch-ups, this would look amazing in HD. And unlike Super Metroid and Fusion and Zero Mission, this runs at 30 FPS, so a bump to 60 would feel really good. All you'd really lose from 3DS is the bottom screen, which admittedly is very helpful. It's great to just look down and see where you're going without pausing the game entirely, and while you could still have a mini-map, it wouldn't quite be the same. You'll always lose something with ports like this, but taken as a whole, I think we gain far more than we would lose. This game always should have been on Switch, and it's not too late. 11 years ago, during E3 2010, we laid our eyes on the very first 3DS game, being Kid Icarus Uprising, the rebirth of an IP that lay dormant for decades, but more than that, this was Masahiro Sakurai's pit. There were similarities in characters and designs, but for the most part, these are entirely different games. This platformer became a straight-up third-person shooter. Uprising is easily the most ambitious game on the entire system. It felt like for the first time with Nintendo, there was no barrier between handheld budget and console budget. You have a single player with so much variety, so much scale, and it feels like 3 sequels packed into one, and there's so much voice acting. This was one of Nintendo's biggest games to date, and it was a Kid Icarus game. This kind of thing just didn't happen. And on top of all that, there was a full-fledged multiplayer mode, and I played this thing for years. In fact, people are still playing this. Before Splatoon came along, this was Nintendo's shooter, and there's still a lot making it distinct. So why would it be better on Switch? Sure, it could look prettier, but that's not really the problem with this one. The problem is the controls are divisive. Now, personally, I kinda like them, but I'm not gonna call them intuitive. I mean, it came with a stand. What more has to be said? This is a game though that relies on fast inputs and quick reflexes, and so to counter that, I don't think traditional analog sticks would really do it justice. But gyro probably would. Essentially giving this game the Splatoon control scheme I think would work incredibly well. This really is, in my opinion, one of Nintendo's best games ever, and if we can make the control scheme less divisive, then it belongs on the Switch. Rhythm Paradise Megamix, baby! If you've never tried the series, this is the perfect one to start with. It's kinda like WarioWare Gold, where it's essentially a best hits compilation of the greatest games in the series, across GBA, DS, Wii, and even some brand new ones. All you have to do is press a button and beat with the tune, and that's pretty much it. Sounds simple, but there is so much charm. The visual and audio mix is better than any rhythm game I've ever played. There's something so special about this series, so if only to give it another chance, it deserves to be on the Switch. But more than that, seeing the visuals in full HD and listening to the music through proper speakers is something that would elevate the game even higher. The series composer even wants it on Switch. I would of course take a brand new entry, but more people need to play Megamix. It's simply a pure joy. Okay, we all knew these were coming. Ocarina of Time 3D and Majora's Mask 3D. They took two of the most important and influential games of all time and remade them entirely on 3DS. New visuals, enhancements, and the best gyro controls I think I've ever used. This archery game was really hard on the N64, and now you barely have to think about it. You just point and you shoot. Bye bye, Spideys! Ocarina of Time 3D in particular has long been seen as the definitive version of the game, especially if you're coming from the PAL version. So these games are now 30 FPS rather than being in the mid-20s, but in PAL, it sat around 19 FPS, maybe even lower than that, and the text boxes were so slow. Let me show you how much faster it can be. How did we survive in the past? Not everyone loves the new visuals, but it's hard to argue that the game doesn't play better. For instance, boots are now items, so there's no need to pause the game every single time you take on and off the iron boots. That's a lifesaver. It enhances the game in just the right area, but leaves the important parts intact. The tone can certainly be lost in certain scenes like the final fight with Ganon, but for the most part, it's a beautiful game and a very loyal remake. Majora's Mask 3D, on the other hand, gets a little bit more iffy. It's still a good game, but they certainly weren't safe with some of their decisions. It looks stunning, with some of the best texture work I've seen on the 3DS, but other aspects are straight up downgrades. Being Deku Link and hopping on the water now feels slow and sluggish. You need to be at just the right angle, otherwise you barely make it. Whereas in N64, that didn't really matter. Zora swimming, infamously, is a lot worse on 3DS too. Boosting around now depletes your magic meter, so what's the incentive to use it? That kind of stuff just feels worse, and there's other decisions which change the game, not necessarily for the worse, but it does change the tone. For that reason, if these games do come to the Switch, I hope they include the originals. Majora's Mask on N64 and 3DS specifically are two very different games. They may have the same dungeons and the same world, but they play very differently. So beyond including two versions, how could these games be better on Switch? Well, one, going from 240p to 1080p is a massive jump. To be honest, that's kind of all these games need. They already look great, so I just want to see these big, important, industry-defining games back on the big screen. Maybe new music too. Like, fun fact, they made new tracks for Ocarina of Time 3D. You just can't tell, because they're so similar to the originals. Grezzo's had it rough. So this company consists of veterans who've worked on the Mana series. There's some really talented people at this studio, but they're stuck remaking Zelda games, and now Metopia. They had one shot at their own original game by Nintendo, being Ever Oasis, and it came out at the worst time. The Switch was prominent, no one wanted to use their 3DS, and in came this game. It's a town building game mixed with a dungeon crawler, and the more you build your town, the better your dungeon crawling will be. It's a brilliant back and forth, and this game shows that Grezzo can handle original game development. They were just given a really bad hand. If this got the Metopia treatment, I think it could do really well. The fault of its failure wasn't on Grezzo or the game itself, it was solely bad timing on the 3DS. Ocarina of Time 3D is a very popular one to come to Switch, but one that often gets forgotten is a game that came out just 1 month after it, Star Fox 64 3D. This is another beautiful N64 remake and plays way better than the N64 version. Remade visuals, stable frame rate, new voice recordings, they went above and beyond for this one. It might be hard to justify Star Fox 64 3D as a fully priced title, but as an eShop release, I think this could go over really well. They could even enhance the multiplayer, which was a bit basic on 3DS and cut some features from the N64 version. Restoring those and adding online would give this game serious value. I can't see Star Fox Zero ever coming along, but 64 3D has some serious potential. And again, this was a 240p game. Imagine it in full 1080p. That would be stunning. I've been replaying A Link Between Worlds, and this game, good lord is it good! How on earth do you do a sequel to A Link to the Past and deliver on that? One of the most important and influential games of all time, and you do it again and debatably better. I mean, this poll I did scientifically says it's better, and I can't argue with science. The thing is though, I've seen Metopia, I've seen Link's Awakening, and going back to the 3DS with A Link Between Worlds is a little jarring. It still plays amazingly well at 60 FPS, but just imagine it looking like this or this. I will say the stereoscopic 3D effect is amazing in this game, but apart from that you wouldn't really lose anything bringing this game to the Switch. Other games like Ocarina and Star Fox I think would be fine as they are in a higher resolution, but this one I want to see get the full overhaul treatment. Obviously I'd rather have the Oracle games first, remaking those is far more important. But this is my favourite 3DS game, and if Metopia can be remade, then so can this. A Link Between Worlds is just as good, if not far better, than the big 3D Zeldas, and it deserves the same respect. Shimagami Tensei is making something of a comeback. There were a few years where the Persona series was so popular that the core Shimagami Tensei series was getting overshadowed. However, this year, Shimagami Tensei 3 is getting remastered for Nintendo Switch, and the brand new Shimagami Tensei 5 is coming exclusively to the platform. This leaves SMT 1, 2, and 4 on older consoles, and SMT 4 was made specifically and exclusively for 3DS. Atlus even seem interested in remastering and porting their older titles, so this is definitely a possibility. Having all these Shimagami Tensei games in one place would be a dream. And there's one way to add even more value to this, as SMT4 isn't a single game. A few years later, quite deep into the 3DS lifecycle, came Shimagami Tensei 4 Apocalypse, a sequel to Shimagami Tensei 4. Bundling both games for the Switch would make this one an enticing package. I didn't know what to do with this game on the list, so I left it till the end, where fewer people would see it. Okay, so I love Mario 3D Land, and we did an entire video on this game, but would it be better on the Switch? Well, part of me says no, but another part says maybe. Stereoscopic 3D is a huge part of this game. The depth perception is just tricky without it. Level structure and angles are designed around this viewpoint, and without it, the game loses something. That said, Nintendo kinda did this to themselves. I mean, we had the 2DS and the new 2DS XL. A big portion of the 3DS install base did not play this game in 3D. Is it really a make or break deal? And further to that, Mario 3D Land is a 30 FPS game, unlike Galaxy, Galaxy 2, Odyssey, and of course 3D World. It could also do with a speed boost, much like 3D World on the Switch. So there's definitely a lot this game could gain, but is it worth sacrificing 3D? I genuinely don't know. If this never left the 3DS, I don't think I'll be bitter. It's a perfect fit for the console, but there's also very little stopping it from leaving 3DS. So I guess I'll leave this one to you guys. Should it stay on 3DS, or does this one deserve to come to Switch? So are there any 3DS games that you think would be enhanced by the Switch? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to go to that subscribe button and just slap some Joy-Cons on the side and say, "You're on the Switch now, subscribe button," and you ain't going nowhere. And we'll see you next time. Bye everyone.